Morning and welcome to another episode of 10 Minute Strategy. My name is Peter Propp and I'm here with the founder of KnockMedia, Nate Berger. Nate, today we're going to talk about user experience. I really look forward to hearing your insights and sharing it with our audience. So let's just get right into it. How does someone know when they need help with user experience?
Sure, great question, and good morning, Peter. Great to be with you. I think user experience now is a more popular and trendy thing, and it really covers a lot of different industries and titles, different job titles. A lot of people see it now. And before we get too deep into it, let's just level set on the terms for a second, because one of the common things that we see is a misunderstanding with two very general terms in this space. One is what we're talking about today, user experience, and the quick name of this is UX. The other one is user interface, UI. And we see it's very common to misunderstand which each means. So before we get too far, let's just explain in terms of a car stereo, if you will. You're looking at your car radio. Your car radio has buttons and dials, and many of them have these little monitors, touch screens, if you will. That's the interface. That's the UI. These are tangible components, things that I could interact with. And my experience, the UX, is really just that. It's my experience with the interface. So as I'm pulling up a song or I'm going to a different record to listen to, and I'm dialing up on the monitor, my interaction and my experience with said interface is my experience. That's the UX. So that's really what we're talking about today, and that's where we play at KnockMedia, both user interface and user experience. But in terms of today's conversation, I think you see it across the board now. And you could be in a product company, you could be in a startup where you have a new product that you're introducing to the market, and you really need to think about the user experience of that product, of what you're creating, and then of the marketing around the product. So UX is everywhere there if you're a product company. And if you're a nonprofit, for example, you've got perhaps you're just pushing out content and messaging. There's strong calls to action. That's user experience. It's everywhere there as well. So I think it's across the board. It's a need that we see a lot. And now I'm going on my 18th year doing user experience. And at the very early part of that, it wasn't a common term. You didn't really have a lot of people who knew what it meant. And there was a lot of educating, telling people what it meant. Now people get it. People understand that UX is important. And if I'm starting out in my career as a marketing manager, or if I'm very far along in my career, a VP, or I'm overseeing the direction of product launch, for example, UX is a part of my job and a very important part of what I'm doing. So to answer your question, it's everywhere.
Right. And sometimes we call it brand experience too, right? There's a crossover between like the way a brand might interact, what does their customer service team do? Do they get you to people right away? Are they friendly? That's also could be brand experience related to user experience.
Sometimes referred to as customer experience, CX, as well. Totally different worlds. We sort of play in that, but user experience is really the start of all of that. And it's kind of exciting to see it be trendy and be something that people talk about now, because it's what we do. It's what we do every day.
Awesome. So what are the first steps that you consider when developing an approach to solve a customer user experience challenge?
Ask good questions. This is a plan that you need to put together here, and it's very much like building a house. You wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. You'd really plan out the intricacies of your design before you started building. At least most people do. And the same thing goes here. When you're building a website or an app, if you're creating an experience, you got to do the same thing. You got to create a plan. And that starts with asking good questions and coming up with hard requirements. We call them functional or non-functional requirements documents, but it really doesn't need to be that technical. You can come up with requirements lists that are essentially just that. They're lists. So it doesn't need to be super technical, but you really need to dig deep and think about what you're building. And it goes beyond just creating a list of requirements, right? So that's generally where we start. You're asking great questions. You're understanding the features and the functionality, what it is that you're trying to create. But then you're taking it a step further. This is the actual tangible blueprint part, where maybe you're creating a sitemap, maybe you're creating wireframes, a journey map. There's a lot of different documentation that you can create when you're planning out and starting a user experience that will help in the long run. And the challenges that we see are when you really speed through that, or you don't do that, when you don't spend the time to even sit down and have a really good session asking great questions. The value of that is tremendous. But to take it a step further, when we're talking about creating wireframes, for example, I'm thinking about what the components are of all of my screens. And then if I'm putting together a user flow, I'm thinking about how a user goes from screen to screen. Think about that. That's super important to do before you actually start building something. So the answer is really, it's about the discovery phase, really focusing on discovery. But within that, it's creating some tangible pieces like the wireframes and the journey maps, et cetera, et cetera. You really got to think these things through, and you really got to approach it like you're building anything else.
Right. You and I were just talking about a client of ours who has a cool idea for a software platform. And what I suggest they do before they got much further with us was, what is it? What is the person going to do? Day one, how do they sign up? How do they interact? How do they get value? How do they, how do you know what they've done? At the basic level, what are you expecting the user to do? And it goes much more complicated than that. But if you haven't thought through those issues, you're really not going to end up with a product that the end user is going to enjoy.
And to be clear, we have customers that come to us with, you may have heard, low fidelity or high fidelity wireframes. Low fidelity meaning super simple. You could go up to a whiteboard and, this is what the screen looks like. You're doing it with a pen. And or high fidelity, you're going into Figma and you're creating a true layout of the screen. We have customers that come to us with that stuff. They've already given some time to think through those first parts, and that's good. I mean, if you're starting the project with that planning phase, that's a really good starting point. But as we know, there are other pieces to this process. You got to continue after the discovery.
Absolutely, layers and layers.
Yes, exactly.
And so we're getting close to our 10-minute mark. What are some of the key principles to use? What are some of the key principles to good user experience? What do you sort of want people to think about when they are interacting with the web or software products?
Sure. I would say first and foremost, it is storytelling. You got to remember what you're doing. So if you're storytelling and your canvas is a digital piece, then you really got to think about that. What is the message that I'm trying to get out there? What am I trying to say, and how am I trying to say it? So first and foremost, best practice. Remember, you're doing storytelling, and you have to give it its due diligence. But beyond that, I would break it up into two main components. Really, there's technical best practices and there's creative best practices. And if you could really balance those, if you could come to the table with a hybrid approach where you're thinking about both of those things, then you're going to be successful with creating a user experience. And just very high level, what I mean by that is technical UX is more along the lines of, we see a lot of needs about compliance right now, and language, right? RTL, right to left, where you literally have the language go right to left across the screen. These are technical requirements and totally change the user experience. And we're talking about compliance, for example, ADA compliance. There are a lot of considerations that you need to take to make sure that your website is technically sound from a UX perspective. And then a creative standpoint, it's really the look and feel. It's the images, the fonts, the layout of the screen, the whole vibe of the look and feel that you've created. If you could balance those two things, then I think that the experience that you create is going to be super successful.
Excellent. Yeah, and keep you out of trouble too, right? Because these days, ADA actually has a legal component as well.
Yeah, we're seeing that with a lot of our projects now too, where not only do people know about user experience, but they know about compliance too. And our customers are coming to us with hard requirements to be compliant, and you really can't ignore that. At this point, you cannot ignore being compliant from a UX perspective and also from backend perspective as well.
Excellent. Well, I think we've covered the waterfront pretty well here on UX, and I think we'll have a chance to do this again in the future. So thanks for your time, and have a great day.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter.
Take care.